Sermon today, but I have to say this is 2 weeks in a row that the communion talks have messed me up. Thank you, Greg. And that was amazing, Abigail, how the song following communion fit perfectly with communion. I don't know if y'all were in communication, but that was moving. I almost feel like you could go home right now and, well, except we have a potluck. And Wow. Next week, we're going to have a guest preacher. I'm going to be here. I am out of town all week, but next week we're going to have a guest preacher. Reed Mitchell preached the very first sermon Oak Ridge Church of Christ ever had. They met at Mary Martin Elementary. I wasn't around back then. It was the first Sunday in October of 1999, 20 years ago next Sunday. And Reed has agreed to come back and preach on our 20th anniversary. So clap, go ahead. So I'm excited, I'm very, very excited. I want to leave Reed, just having his own credit. Basically, what Oak Ridge did in those days was the men in the church took turns preaching, and they invited some outside guests to come and preach. And I kind of wanted to leave it with that, but look, let me give him a little extra props. He's Jan Lynch's son-in-law, or Jewel Ann as the family calls her. And so that makes him really special. And I really appreciate him being willing to come and do that for us. We're going to have several special things that happen next Sunday in relation to just commemorating 20 years of a church. Because we have a potluck today, we decided not make a big splash out of 20, but we're ready to start planning for 25. We'd like to have a big thing in 5 years, so be thinking and praying about that. You waved at me, Rachel.
I was just going to say, Reed Mitchell was the ring bearer in our wedding.
Reed Mitchell was the ring bearer in your wedding.
He was.
Rachel, you must have got married at 11 or 12 years old. Because you are so young, there is no way that grown man was your ring bearer. Or maybe he was an 18-year-old ring bearer. I don't know. Wow.
I'll bring a picture next time.
That is really cool. Yeah, bring a picture. We'll put it up. Don't tell him.
Okay.
It's not on Facebook or anything.
Okay.
Don't tell him. You bring a picture, we'll put it up behind him while he's preaching. That will be fun. All right. Give me a second. Let's just pause for 10 seconds of silence. Do you mind? You can close your eyes if you want to. Leave them open if you want to. Give me just 10 seconds and then we'll begin. In John chapter 18, we move from what Bible scholars call the farewell discourse into the passion narrative. This long series of instructions and encouragement that Jesus gave the disciples began with him washing their feet. Think back on chapters 13 through 17. Remember, the first words Jesus spoke were to Peter, who refused to let Jesus wash his feet. You don't understand what I am doing now, but you will understand later. Then Jesus taught them to serve each other, to love one another, and to remain or abide in Jesus. And he finished out the whole long discourse with this beautiful prayer for those disciples who were still with him, and for those who would believe through their testimony. Jesus prayed for the Father to make us one. Now please, listen as I retell to you my thoughts after meditating on John 18, 1 through 27. When Jesus finished his prayer, they exited the city of Jerusalem and followed the steps down into the Kidron Valley. They stepped over the small brook that ran there and went back up the Mount of Olives to a walled garden. Judas brought a mob to the garden. He knew where they would be because Jesus had many times taken the disciples there to pray. Because Jesus knew all that was going to happen, he left the disciples in the garden and went out and confronted the mob. "Whom do you seek?" "Jesus of Nazareth." "I am." Judas stood there with them, but when Jesus said, "I am," they all stumbled backwards and fell to the ground. The disciples pressed up against Jesus. "Whom do you seek?" "Jesus of Nazareth." "I've already told you that I am. If it's me you seek, let these go." But Peter drew a dagger and pressed past Jesus and struck at the slave of a high priest. A piece of his right ear flew off. "Sheath your sword, Peter. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" The Roman soldiers arrested Jesus. The temple guards bound him and led him away to the estate of Annas, a former high priest. Peter and John followed the mob right to the gate of Annas. The disciple John, the other disciple, appeared to know Annas and his household, and he entered right in with the mob. But Peter was stuck at the gate. And so the other disciple came to the gate and said to the slave girl who was there to let Peter in. As Peter walked by, she wondered out loud, "Are you one of his disciples too?" "I am not." And Peter went to a fire in the courtyard where the slaves and the guards were warming themselves. As Peter denied Jesus, Annas interrogated Jesus about his disciples and his teachings. "There are no secret teachings. I have spoken openly to the whole world. I taught in your synagogues and in the temple courts to Jewish assemblies. Why ask me? Ask the ones who heard me. They know what I taught." The guard beside Jesus struck him in the face. "Is this how you answer the high priest?" If I've misspoken, point out the wrong. But if I speak truth, why strike me? Peter remained with the guards and the slaves around the fire. "You're not one of those disciples, are you?" "I am not." A relative of Malchus, the slave whose ear was cut off, remembered Peter from the garden and called him out. And Peter denied Jesus a third time. Immediately, a rooster called out. We've moved into a powerful place in the Scriptures. What we've come to in John 18 is a study in contrasts. We are looking at the difference between Jesus and these other characters in the story. Jackie, will you take us to the next slide? I forgot the clue. This is why you messed me up, Greg. It's like you read my sermon notes. In this story, Jesus is contrasted. He's contrasted with Peter. He's contrasted with Annas. He's contrasted with the soldiers. He's contrasted with Judas. And the first big difference that we face in them is that Jesus is completely proactive, and everyone else is reactive. Do you realize that in the other three Gospels, there's a prayer Jesus prays for God to take the cup away from me? It's not in this story. That prayer isn't here because John is emphasizing for us the fact that Jesus comes to the garden knowing what's going to happen and what he's going to do. John emphasizes for us Jesus intends to drink this cup. Jesus enters the garden, and then when the mob shows up, Jesus, like a good shepherd, secures his sheep in the fold and goes out to confront the predators. He is proactive in his movements. Jesus stands before Annas, and Annas interrogates him. And then Annas attacks him. And even the guard strikes him. And yet Jesus speaks strength and determination and commitment into the mission Jesus is accomplishing. Jesus is proactive. He is moving forward. And John wants us to know Jesus is not having a cup poured down his throat. Jesus is taking the cup and drinking it. And the other comparison that takes place is the difference between Jesus' integrity and everyone else's duplicity. Jesus remains true to who Jesus is. Jesus is one thing. He's the same person in the garden that he's been all along. He's the same person standing before Annas that he has been all along. Jesus doesn't deny his nature. Annas, the former high priest, violates Jewish procedure when he chooses to interrogate the accused. You see, as high priest, Caiaphas will bring in witnesses to be interrogated. They won't interrogate Jesus. It's not right to interrogate the accused, but Annas is acting in a duplicitous way to try to get Jesus to incriminate himself. He's trying to catch Jesus in Jesus saying something wrong. And when Jesus stands up and calls him out, it's as though Jesus says to Annas, just go ahead and go hire some false witnesses because you know everybody in Jerusalem knows the truth about me. That's why the guard strikes Jesus. Of course, the part of this story that hurts us the most is Peter's loss of integrity. We feel the sting because we identify with Peter. We understand. Here's Peter in the lion's den with Jesus. Peter has swung his sword, and yet he walks and stands around a fire with guards who could arrest him for being a disciple of Jesus. Jesus has insisted that the guards let the disciples go, and they've all gone except Peter and whoever the other disciple is. They've gone right in to danger with Jesus. And yet, when people ask Peter who he is and why he's there, he lies and denies. But Jesus remains true. Now, I understand that you and I, we're not Messiah on our way to the cross. And I get that you and I can admire Jesus and respect Jesus and fall in love with Jesus as we watch him choose this path and find the strength to go down this path. But what about us? Well, Jesus called us to follow him. He called us to take up our cross daily and be his disciples. The apostles remind us time and again that suffering with Jesus brings God glory. Our suffering may never be the same. But the way we will prepare ourselves, should the moment come we are called to endanger our very lives for Jesus, is by learning to live with the integrity Jesus lived with. And that comes out of living proactively to accomplish Jesus' mission, which is to reconcile God's children to the Father. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross and has now sat down at the right hand of the God of glory. We must drink the cup. You know, go ahead and take us to the last slide, Jake. We all admire a mom who works hard to take care of her children and pay her bills, right? Yes? I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to hear the testimony of Miss Colleen that works at the Center of Hope. But when Colleen walked in there to pray with an advocate and to ask for help paying some of her bills, Colleen was a meth addict. She'd already been to jail. She'd already endangered the lives of her kids. She had greatly risked crumbling her entire family. But she drank a cup. She drank a cup of humility that said, I'm at the bottom and it's all going down. And if I don't get help, if I don't submit myself to the teachings of some people who haven't messed their lives up, if I don't submit myself to God and ask him to rescue me, I will never see my grandchildren. And so, she drank the cup. And her cup wasn't a shallow cup like this. Her cup was a deep cup. It was a deep cup of going to meetings to recover from her addiction. It was a deep cup of breaking relationships that were tearing her down. It was a deep cup, a bitter cup of confessing the mess she had made and working hard to build a new life. Do you hear me? She drank the cup to get to what was on the other side of it. And now she's a director of special services at the Center of Hope, and she is constantly investing herself and her story into the lives of other people. It's amazing. We're impressed with a businessman who deals honestly with his customers and his employees. But I could tell you a story of somebody sitting in this very room who had an employee that made a mistake that cost him an enormous amount of money. And his decision was to drink the bitter cup of financial loss in order to redeem an employee and help that employee become a better worker and a better person. Do you hear the difference? We can live mediocre lives of going through the motions. Or we can drink some cups of suffering that bring us to whole new levels of living. Levels that have a positive influence on the world around us. Jesus asks us this morning if we will drink the cup. I want you to be inspired by Jesus' sacrifice. I want you to feel a debt, as Peter talked about in our Sunday school class this morning, to serving and loving Jesus because of all He's done for us. I want you to read the story of the Passion and appreciate Jesus and His sacrifice. But please hear me. Jesus is calling us to follow Him. And your cup may be a cup of fighting a disease. We got a hero among us who chose to take the risk of getting a new kidney and building a second life post-transplant. It's a bitter cup, right, brothers and sisters? But we honor those among us who face life's difficulties, who face life's hard choices, and who choose well, if I might make an Indiana Jones response, not to constantly drink from the bejeweled, sugary cups the world offers us, but to choose the cup of a carpenter who drank his own bitter cup to give us life. May we drink to give life. Let's pray. Holy Father in heaven, may your name be glorified in all that we do. As vessels of clay, may we carry the light of your love, your mercy, your compassion into the world. And may our very nature of being clay vessels allow the cracks in our brokenness to let your light shine out into the darkness. Holy Father, make us like you. Make us like Jesus. Even if it means we have to drink some bitter cups. We pray it in His holy and blessed name. Amen.
Let's stand.